everybody. So I thought I'd take a minute and shoot a video. And this video is meant to help all of you with an exercise that is performed less well than it should be by more athletes than I can count. It's probably the exercise that is most misunderstood, and as a result, it's the exercise that most folks, even when they're doing pretty well with it, don't get the full benefit from it. And that exercise is the half front plank with a reach. Now this exercise is about core stability. That's what it's about. It's neurological, it's in your brain, and therefore the movement as you engage and step through the exercise has got to be perfect. Not almost perfect. It's got to be perfect. And the reason is because we're working with the brain. We've got to lay down wiring and make sure we program the brain to communicate with our body and establish the kind of motor control that is necessary in order for us to be durable and to not leak energy. So in this video, I'm going to step through the exercise exactly as you should approach it. You've seen Kurt do this numerous times in video. We've got instructional videos, a couple of them, for this exercise. Yet there are some key elements that I think many of you are missing. And that's why I'm going to take the time now to share some thoughts about it. And I appreciate you following through. So, first of all, this exercise has to be done in front of a mirror unless you are so good with it and so confident in your skill that you don't need the mirror. Very few athletes I know fall into that category. Not me. Maybe you do. So, there's my mirror. I'm going to get down into that half front position. And the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that I've got a perfectly straight line between my shoulder, my hip, and my knee. So one of the more common errors that people make is their hips start to rise up just a little bit and they get out of that straight line. What happens there is you tend to hang a little bit more on the psoas and the hip flexors to make that stability happen. That's not what we're training. We're training the trunk to work as a holistic unit and function holistically, create stability from the shoulder to the hip. Now, as you know, I've got my knees about hip width apart, and that's pretty much where I want to leave them. So I want to be in an absolutely straight line. The other thing to really be cognizant of with this exercise, and many people miss this, if I bring my elbows all the way together, I've made this as easy as it can be. And if I separate my arms from that entirely together position, I make it harder. When my arms are together and parallel to each other, I basically create a wheelbarrow, and that's exactly what I want to do to make it more easy. Because at this point in time, I've created a nice three-point stance, which allows me to establish that stability pretty easily. But as I separate my arms, even just a little bit, I'm now forced to create that stability in my core, and it's much more challenging because I've lost a little bit of base of support, and I've shifted that base of support from the center, as in a wheelbarrow. So whenever you struggle with this exercise, come back to this position. This is how you peel back, to your arms being more parallel and right together with each other. And as you challenge yourself, if you're ready to move up to something which is more challenging, start to separate your arms just a little bit. So that's how you progress or regress depending on how things are feeling from one day to the next. Okay, so I've got my forearms facing forward. They're about parallel to each other. I check to see that my shoulder, hip, and knee are in an absolutely straight line. And then I'm going to contract the glutes. And this becomes an absolutely critical portion of this exercise. I don't know if you can tell, but it's tight. Once I create that glute contraction. I've really got good contraction all the way through my entire low extremity, everything from the waist down. You can see I'm pulling my toes down into my shin. I like to create a lot of tension there because that's going to allow me to really solidify and then load my trunk. So glutes are tight, straight line, arms are in position. Now comes the critical moment in the exercise. What is that critical moment? The critical moment is when I start to think about reaching. One of the most common errors I see, athlete will get down in that position and boom, the arm goes out. Well, by the time you get the arm out to here, game's over. Sure, you can stay out there for a while and load your trunk in some capacity, but you're not training stability at that point. You're training strength or endurance, depending on how you want to, determine at that point. The stability happens when you begin to think about unloading the arm and when you actually unload it to extend. Think about running, right? From one leg to the next, you land. And believe it or not, or you probably believe it, but you've never thought about it, your brain anticipates what's going to happen prior to your foot coming down to hit the ground. On a trail, that anticipation and neurological awakening or activity is even at a higher level because the surface is undulating. So your brain anticipates that that surface is going to be hard, and it loads and stabilizes in preparation for it. How many times have you stepped off a step when you didn't see the step, or you didn't see what you were stepping off of, and you fumble and fall, and you could even, actually, I think people have broken an ankle. And the reason they did it was because their brains were not able to anticipate what was happening. It's like bumbling and stumbling around in the dark. Your eyes don't see, the brain doesn't get the message, and therefore that stability, in terms of that neurological motor control, doesn't happen. So, that moment when you're here and you begin to think about reaching, and notice I said not when you reach, but actually when you begin to think about reaching. Common errors. People get themselves in this position, and then, as soon as they start to think about it, I'll see their hips shift or their body shift. They haven't reached yet, but already that instability has occurred. So at that point, you're done. Stop, regress, peel back. Make sure that moment when you unload and when you think about unloading, everything is rock solid. So again, straight line, glutes are tight, everything is rock solid. This has to happen very slowly. When I reach, I'm staring right at my low back right now, staring right at it, making sure it doesn't move, doesn't shift, reaching slowly. That is stable. So if I get here and I start to reach and something drops, game over. At that point, I'm not doing it correctly. And therefore, I'm not training that motor control. I'm not training it in the ways that I need to. So, if you're having a hard time getting that exactly right, go back to just driving your elbows. Go back to just squeezing your butt. Go back to allowing everything to connect and integrate prior to movement. When you do that, the movement itself happens relatively easy. Now, one last thing. This is a moving target. This isn't something that once you do it right, and once you get it so it feels really good, and you're staring right at your hips, and you're staring right at your low back, and there's not even a millimeter of movement. That's fantastic. But it doesn't mean you're going to be able to replicate it a week from now, especially after a series of a couple of hard workouts, maybe some changes in your lifestyle, some additional stress, maybe too much time in the car. This is a moving target. This exercise allows you to monitor your core stability from one day to the next and adjust and train it as needed. Some days it'll be good, some days it'll be less than perfect. So you peel back, try to get it right. Onward we go. That's the process. And if you can get it right most of the time and nail it pretty good and be able to keep your butt tight, then you're going to be pretty solid through the middle. There's no question that in the 5 years we did gait analysis, Kurt and I saw a direct correlation between the execution of this exercise and lateral pelvic drop on the treadmill. And that lateral pelvic drop is probably the single biggest indicator for risk of injury. So it's an important biomarker when we're looking at movement in running. Same is true, of course. I mean, it doesn't take very much watching that or thinking about it to think and see how it correlates to swimming and cycling as well too. Stability is created from here to here. This has got to be rock solid. The motor control's got to be there. The connection's got to be there. And when it is, you're going to perform really well. Leak very little energy and produce a lot of force, and that's the goal. All right.